Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ryan, and this is Bill here, and we'll go into a little more intros today. But if you weren't with us on our last session here, what we discussed was why security is pivotal in senior living and how communities can take steps to build a culture of accountability and awareness. In this session, we're going to dive a little deeper into how we assess and index those risks in our own communities and facilities. So hopefully yes, we have some stuff that's relevant, pertinent to you, and are able to keep it a little entertaining as well. So without further ado, here we go. Okay, so if you may remember us from last time, my name's Ryan. I'm a former risk manager with senior living companies, walking through processes and everything that we can do on a daily basis to make communities safer for our residents, staff, families, and help avoid risk as well. And then I'll allow Bill here to introduce himself again as well.
Good afternoon, Ryan. Good afternoon, everyone else. Thanks for joining us. I'm really happy to be back. I'm Bill. I'm retired law enforcement, not retired military, former military, former SWAT, but more telling towards today's topic is I've spent about the last, more than 15 years doing consulting with private and faith-based organizations on developing, instituting, and managing their crisis management plans, as well as writing their plans and helping them get to where they feel more comfortable in their environment every single day. So I'm hoping that world translates over to what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and Bill hit that right on the head there. Bill partnered with us here at AccuShield, where our mission is about safety and security for communities and facilities. And Bill brings that expertise in from doing it on the ground and helping create some of those plans from 0 to 1. And that's what we're going to walk you through here today. Okay, so on our agenda today, we're going to identify risks and hazards that may impact your community. This could be anything from weather to trip hazards, inside the community, what we can control, to outside and what we can't. Quantifying. We're going to examine the impact and risk and hazards on your community. This is all levels of business, all levels of operation. We're going to dive into that, and then we're going to prioritize. We're going to determine which items need to be corrected immediately, and maybe which can wait, that aren't quite as important, quite as urgent, but are important to your long-term goals. And that's what we want to go for, is we want to think about those things and get ourselves in a mindset of how do we think a little bit more about mitigating risk, but without being paralyzed by it. Because we all know we can walk out our door and there's everything dangerous that could happen, but we still walk out our doors and we still need to go to work and still do those things and visit our loved ones and contribute to our community. And we can't be paralyzed by that fear. So our goal today is not to scare you. And our goal today is not to make anything fearful here, but just to help us be a little more cautious, expanding on our awareness, which was the name of the game in our session last month. Bill, anything to add here before I think
so important point you bring up there, because we want to make sure we're living in a point of cautious, aware, like we talked about last month. Sometimes one of the biggest lifts we have is convincing people they need to be paying attention to these kind of things. You are in danger of it, but then we want to temper that to make sure you get to the point where, but life goes on. Okay. And like you said, driving is dangerous. Car crashes happen every day, every week, every year. And we do lose a lot of Americans to car crash fatalities. We didn't stop driving, but we did some things to mitigate, to make it more safer. We wear seatbelts, we abide by traffic laws, we keep it in the speed limit. So, that's kind of the way we go through our life then. So we make ourselves aware of these things. We put some things in place to reduce the chance of them happening. And then we push forward and we go on because the mission has to continue. So we're cautious. We don't want to be paranoid. We want to be able to still do the job that we do. And so many people that work in these communities, they have a regular job. They're not a full-time crisis manager. And so I want them to be able to do their regular job effectively with that backdrop, realizing that they can be safe while they do it as well.
Yeah, well said. And I think right here, we're going to talk about some of the categories to consider here. So Bill, why don't we touch on some of these and you provide some color to the context?
Absolutely. So last month, if you were with us, we talked a lot about awareness and raising your awareness, raising your concern level, making sure you understand these are things that you need to be paying attention to. Now that we've got that attention, though, now what do we do? What's our next steps? Our physical steps is what we recommend is you're going to do a vulnerability assessment for your community, or your communities if you have several of them. And those are going to be unique to every location, too, by the way. So just because you have the same name on the building, but it's in different towns, different cities, or even different states, you're going to want a vulnerability assessment, or what you may hear us say, a VA, just for short, at each one of those communities, each one of those locations, because you'll see the terrain changes. So when we do a VA, or a vulnerability assessment, what we're ideally looking for is the things that we're at risk for. What are the things that we call maybe the holes in the fences, the dangers, the things that are going to hurt our residents, hurt our staff, hurt our visitors or our vendors, anything that is obviously a life safety thing, and then also things that are going to impact operations. If it's give us mess up our tempo to be able to provide the service that you provide, then it's something we need to look at and try to mitigate, or at least be prepared for when it happens. So the VA is going to take a good hard look at the operation, and some of the dots you see on your screen there, not necessarily in order of appearance. These are some ideas of some things you want to look at. I like to start at the small and work my way out. So interior hazards, each one of our resident rooms, maybe our resident facilities, the dining areas, the prep areas, the storage areas. We're going to start in those individual rooms, start working outward. Are going to our building community, or building and property areas, looking at our hallways, our community areas, our gathering areas. That's our parks, that's our interior lounges and that sort of thing. Looking at those things for problems, risks, and we're going to talk more specifically about what we're looking for in just a moment. But then we start getting broader into our traffic patterns, your parking lot. If you've got people, you've got a parking lot, right? And someone's parking their car and walking up to your location, your building. And so if you have pedestrians with cars, and you have problems. And so our traffic flow, as well as all the to our traffic bollards, make sure that buildings are protected from errant drivers or malicious vehicle operations. We're going to go out into our community, and we're going to look at the things around us that maybe aren't our problem, but they could become our problem. Okay. And so we'll give you some examples of some of those things to look for, and maybe who you can reach out to help identify some of those things. And then let's talk about taking trips off property. Let's take about taking our, if you will, field trips, going to the local shopping, going to the gambling casino, going to different places where you're taking your residents in these organized bus trips, if you will. You're responsible for what happens off property, just like on property. So we'll talk about some hazards or some risks you can look at there. And then we'll move all the way into the final, which is more of a little bit of the bean counter, if you will, the laborsome behind the desk look is, what's your current crisis plan look like? Hopefully you have one. I'm sure you do, but make sure that crisis plan is up to date and so on. So these are just some suggestions of some of our hazard. This is what I would consider the minimum of the things I'm going to look for in a vulnerability assessment. You can certainly broaden it. And as we get near the end, I'll give you a couple of my thoughts and some things we can broaden out to if you wanted to go further with it. But at the minimum, these are the things you want to look at to determine where your risks are and what you need to be planning for and what should be included in your plan. And then later on, what we'll talk about, I'll tease for next month, is how you train and test that plan.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into all of it. And right now, I just wanted to let everyone know we do have a poll up. You can find that on the right-hand side of the chat window under the polls tab. And we'd love to get some feedback on that and just see where everybody's at. And this was the poll. It's, how well do your staff and stakeholders understand and engage with your community's crisis plan? That could also be known as, emergency response plan or anything like that. We know everyone has different terminology on how they do things, but how do we respond in the case of a crisis, an emergency? And do we think we're comfortable with that? Do we think our staff is? We're guessing and hoping that most people on this call, it already is at the forefront of our heads. Like, we're thinking about that every day. We're worried about, not worried, I would say, but we're concerned about how things go in our community and how they interact with our residents, staff, and families. So just testing some temperature here and seeing what we can go forward and what we can help with.
I'm really, really curious to see the results in this. I think I kind of know where they're at, but I'm going to let the poll tell me for sure. But this should be telling to you as well. So I want everybody watching to take a look at this too. That, just because you have a great plan on paper, doesn't mean it's really functional or it's been, when was the last time that was updated? What has changed around your community that might need to be updated in your plan right now? Has the new group of people, the new person, the new LPN, or the new CNA that's been hired in the last 2 weeks, have they actually sat down and been made aware of the plan? Those are the things that we sometimes just like, well, we just assume it gets done, and before we know it, time has passed and nobody has looked at this thing for months or even years.
Yep, absolutely. And Bill touched on something on our last conversation that I think is really important and really plays into what we're talking about here. It's policy versus procedure. Sure, policy is what we write down and what we hope in a perfect world is going to happen. But what is the actual procedure that occurs in our buildings? What is the actual process that happens when something, does go up in flames, literally or metaphorically?
Right, right. And that's really what you're going to be graded against is what was your standard operating procedure versus what your policy said you were going to be doing. And so when the dust settles and everybody says, okay, what did they do right? What did they do wrong? Is somebody responsible for this thing? The true tell is going to be, well, this is how we really did it, even though the paper book said do it other ways. So that's what we want to be aware of. When we do the VA, we're going to be looking at our crisis plan, as well as how we train that plan, how we test that plan. And so hopefully this is kind of all encompassing for you for kind of an indoctrination into writing or rewriting your current emergency operation plan.
Absolutely. So looks like we have a good mix of answers across the board here. 2 thumbs up so far that nobody said they're not familiar with their crisis plan at all. So we're already
never heard of such a thing. Okay, well, while we're waiting for maybe the last of those come in there, let's talk about this risk index, Ryan. So this probably looks a little bit confusing, and it might be some small right on your screen, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about what this means. Once we do our vulnerability assessment, you're going to probably learn some stuff about your community that you didn't know. You might learn some stuff about your community. Like, yeah, we knew that was a problem. We just haven't gotten around to it. Whatever the case is, you're going to list out all of those things, okay? Whether it be problems in your crisis plan, problems in your off-property trip planning. And then you're going to have this huge bowl of all these problems that you got to deal with now. And it's going to be kind of like trying to eat an elephant, right? And it's like, okay, what do I handle first? How do I deal with this thing? It just seems too overwhelming. What I'm going to give you is this risk index tool. And the risk index is going to be a way to prioritize that word Ryan talked about earlier, how to go and attack these list of problems. Okay. Obviously, we want to attack things that are life safety things. We want to go after the things that right now there is a problem in your community that you shouldn't have anyone on your property right now until this thing is addressed. Or, hey, listen, there's some long-term things we're looking at. It's resurfacing and painting the parking lot with some better crosswalk lines. So not necessarily it's going to cause problems tomorrow. It's something we need to be looking for the future. So a risk index can help you kind of grade each one of those things. And so, for example, we look at the frequency of the event, the magnitude of the event, the warning of the event, the warning time you're going to have, and the severity if should such an event occur. And you take those 4 scores and you add them all up. And just an example, if you came up with a score of less than 4 or 4, you can't get any less than 4. But if you come up with a score of between 4 and 7, it's a low risk event. Doesn't mean you can ignore it, but that means you can put it further down in your planning. And then, of course, if you get one of those 13 to 16 scores, those are type of things we need to put a team on this right now and maybe not take any more off-property trips until this particular issue is addressed, if that was one of your places you scored high at. So your risk index is the tool you're going to use once your VA is done. But feel free to steal this though and use this to kind of prioritize how you attack all of the problems where you find your VA. I think I mentioned last month as well. Once you've become aware, now you're responsible and now you're also liable. So once you do your vulnerability assessment in your community and you've become aware of the problems that are there, the risks that are there, the trip and fall hazards, exposed electrical lines and so on. Now you're liable for those things. And so we need to start on the path now of correcting them and then working them out of the process so that we no longer have them as issues in our crisis plan. At the very least, you have a plan for them. You can't prevent hurricanes, but you can prepare for them, though. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said there, Bill. I think we'll head on to the next one here.
We're going to get
And
right into the common hazard types. And, I said there's an order of appearance. This is just simply the way I do it. You could certainly go in reverse if you wanted to look at your community and then work all the way into the small ground. What we're going to do is we're going to start with interior hazards. Okay. And just kind of talk a little bit about some of the things that I would look for if I was doing this. And then this isn't necessarily, like I said, the exhaustive list, and we're not going to line by line you to death. You'll be able to see what's on your screen here. I also would recommend that this maybe is considered to be maybe a team effort, or at least someone who is maybe a little bit more experienced at doing this kind of work. If you have multiple locations, I would even recommend this: is that have someone from your site A come to your site B to do their assessment and vice versa, because now you got a fresh set of eyes. Okay. And there's someone from internal, they're going to understand that policy versus procedure thing too. Or of course, looking at an SM or a subject matter expert or somebody to come in and do this for you, it can become laborsome to spend. I'll spend sometimes 3 or 4 days on property, depending on the size of the location, before I even leave and start getting down behind a keyboard. Okay. So Ryan, if you could bring up that next slide here, we'll take a look at some of those interior hazards that we can kind of look for, if you will. And these are going to be kind of specific to the terrain that you live in. Okay. Let me give you an example. If you're in Florida, which I'll admit I'm in Florida, and so we have a lot of focus on hurricanes and floods. Okay. You'll hear us talk about lightning a lot because we're the capital, or they say that anyways. But I also want to remember that we have communities that are in California, and you talk about earthquakes quite a bit. You talk about, wildfires quite a bit, and those type of things need to be. So when we point out some of these examples we're giving, these might not be completely alien to you if you're in some place that doesn't have earthquakes, and we talk about freestanding or non-anchored cabinets or bookcases. Okay, someone in California knows exactly what we're talking about. Those need to be secured to the wall so they don't tip over during earthquakes. Trip and fall hazards, I think we all kind of know what we're looking for there. But things that can be repaired, concrete cracks and those type of things, those are the type of things that we need to have teams on immediately. I wouldn't put them on a list and let them sit in the community board or the committee's board for the next 6 months while we write our plan. Things like the damaged furniture, those type of things, you're going to kind of look at your interior rooms, your areas, your residences, and just take a really good hard look at the things that could hurt somebody, could be a risk. The excessive stored personal valuables. Let's talk about this just for a minute here. I want to have a great deal of respect for the privacy of our residents. I want to make sure that they feel like this is their home, that they feel comfortable there, that their families and their guests feel comfortable when they come there as well. But I also don't want to put the temptation out that causes risk of loss or victimization. Okay, so there is a degree of concern when you have excessive stored personal valuables or things that could be more responsibly handled. And let's just take a wild example. Let's just say stacks of cash sitting on somebody's countertop or in their dining room table. That may make them feel very comfortable, but your cleaning crew and your vendors and your other people walking past that door, that may be a temptation too great. And so as an assessor, in your community, it might be it's this a way we protect those residents. Say, hey, listen, let's maybe put this stuff away. The example I talk about is when you go on a cruise they specifically offer vault services, or at least a couple that I've seen. They'll lock up your valuable jewelry for you while you're on that cruise. Okay. You want to take it with you because you want to wear it or you want to enjoy it, but you also don't want to leave it in your stateroom though. And so maybe even something like that for your community that you could offer, or give the residents an opportunity to maybe secure those things or discuss to them, not making them such a soft target by leaving those things or advertising those things to be out there. Um, but with the list there, Ryan, I'll leave it open if you want to talk to anything else. I didn't want to beat it up too bad, but we're looking at, like I said, individual rooms, individual occupation areas, maybe workspaces, and this involves your workspaces too, right, Ryan? It's your desk, your cubicles, where the staff are occupying regularly as well, and this goes to them leaving their purses unattended, leaving their bags, valuable electronics unattended at their workstations, because a theft is a risk and it's a problem, and that's what we're trying to limit, is all of these things.
Yeah. And only thing I really have to add is, as Bill touched on some of those temptations that could, lead to a crime that occurs, I'll look at some things that maybe a little are softer risk, so to say. So we talk about excessive stored valuables. Sometimes it's not even the valuables being stored excessively that can lead to issues. I can't tell you how many times, Bill, I've walked into a residence room, whether it be assisted living or independent, and all their groceries are stacked up on the stovetop or in the oven themselves, being used as a
Oh my
shelf for
goodness,
storage.
yes.
And all
Yeah,
it takes is one person in a walker or wheelchair to bump into that little burner, turn it on, and you have a fire on your hands.
right.
And no fault of anybody but their own for that to occur. And you have plastic burning, you have groceries burning, cardboard, and things go up in flames.
Oh
So
yeah.
just some small things like that are really important. And normally in assisted living, we're not going to have those ovens and those stoves, but those could turn into trip hazards when we have
Mhm.
excessive. And the
Yep.
other one I really want to talk about is the improper lighting. We can notice a trip hazard in a room with a carpet folded over or a threshold that's broken, but we know as our seniors' eyes kind of go a little bit as we get older there. Nothing throws off balance in a memory care unit specifically more than improper lighting. When someone thinks there's a step or thinks that they're crossing a threshold and they may not have all their faculties there, and that light changes from dark carpet to light carpet, trips happen, falls happen a lot of the time because of that lighting. So sometimes it's good to walk through with those fresh set of eyes and look for the shadows. Look for those things that may be a little bit off. Maybe you're doing great. We're, 30 years old. We can see well, we can move well. But let's go through that idea of what does it look like if, we take our contacts out or we take our glasses out and we try to walk the campus the same way.
Yeah.
Let's put ourselves in the shoes of our residents and really see what we can notice that's kind of dangerous.
Moving into building, getting a little bit more broader with our examples now, like we talked about, is kind of the same eye, but you're going to start looking at a little bit more broad examples. These are the maybe your community areas. These are maybe some of your maintenance areas, your office areas. You see right off the bat there where some of the hazardous materials might be stored at. I want to remind you, if you're storing these type of things, whether it be cleaning supplies, whether it be chlorine, whether it be cooking supplies, those type of things. And depending on your location, you may need and they call MSDs, or material safety data sheets, stored for each one of these items, electronically or physically or both. So if the fire department shows up for, like Ryan mentioned, a fire, they're going to know what's stored there, at least in certain volumes. And so the hazardous materials that are stored, obviously oxygen, that sort of thing. If you do have those things, those are going to need to be, managed. Assistance can be gained through your local first responders, through local fire, your fire inspectors, to help guide you on the process of making sure those MSD sheets are stored properly and presented, proper placarding and that sort of thing. But you're looking for where these things are not being done. That's what your vulnerability assessment tells you. Unsecured food prep areas. And the reason I know this is because my wife worked in a cafeteria for both in a school and then later on in a community. And she was explaining to me how the utensils that they store all have to be in a drawer in a certain direction. And I said, well, I like that because I'm a little OCD. And she said, well, the reason for it is because when you're reaching to grab the utensils out, you shouldn't be touching the eating end of the utensil. You should be touching the handle end of the utensil. I was like, that makes so much sense, but that's a food standard, at least in my state it is. And that's something an inspector is going to look at and I'm sure in your dining area, your manager knows this. But is every single person abiding by this? So things like that, your building hazard examples. And I will talk about fire alarms because it's important. And it's one of those things that just seems so common to us. We all have seen fire extinguishers hanging on the walls. We all see fire alarms everywhere. We see the sprinklers sticking out of our ceilings. And I want to remind everybody here, you have those items for when a fire happens. And so we need to really take our mind and change it just a little bit. And remember that a fire extinguisher, a fire alarm, or a fire sprinkler system does not prevent a fire. They only work when there actually is a fire to mitigate the fire. Okay. And so we want to make sure those tools work and they're properly in place, they're charged. And I'm sure your fire inspectors come around at least every 6 months, probably at the very minimum once a year, and check those things. But nothing says that you during your annual check can't go around and check those things as well, or even assign someone on your team to do that on a monthly basis if it's not being done more frequently. But like I said, remind ourselves that you wouldn't have those things in place if you didn't believe it could happen. You wouldn't spend that much money on fire alarms and fire extinguishers and sprinklers if it wasn't necessary. But that mindset shift is so important here, that they're not prevention devices, they're reaction devices. And that's what we're trying to teach everyone today, is that we're trying to react to these things. We're not preventing anything. We're making sure we're planning for them.
Yeah, absolutely. One of those examples is oxygen tanks. We know that they are highly flammable. And I've done, assessments, security assessments, or not security, risk assessments, where I've walked into communities and asked where they see oxygen storage. And it's in a shed outside in the sun, a plastic shed. That one thing going wrong, and that thing goes up in flames. And those are important things to remember too, is even when we're building and designing buildings, a lot of, we know, our owners and groups who build the building and then bring in an operator to run it aren't necessarily building it with senior living operation in mind. So we have to make changes after the fact, and it has to take an operator's touch, or in some cases, a nurse's, a director, a chef's, to come in and say, this doesn't quite make sense. Let's repurpose this building or repurpose this room to make this building safer. And I know, Bill, moving right on here to now outside the building a little bit more,
Right.
specifically the traffic.
Yeah, and I mentioned this. If you have cars, you have people walking, and when you have people walking around cars, that's dangerous. So don't forget, when you're doing that VA, take a look at your parking regulator, your parking, accommodations that we have out there. Ryan mentioned lighting, so very important. You should take a look at your parking lot for lighting at night when the lights should be on, to make sure they're working properly, that they're illuminating those areas. Because not only are you looking for pedestrian safety, you're looking for vehicle safety, but also remember, we're trying to reduce loss, theft, or tempting somebody for to steal. So unsecured vehicles on your property that are left with valuables in them, tempting those bad actors from they're not part of your community. They're coming from elsewhere. They're looking for unsecured vehicles. And I can tell you from my career in law enforcement, it was one of the thorns in our side we just could not stop from happening. Literally hundreds upon hundreds per week of unsecured vehicle theft, burglaries, and usually a lot of times turned into thefts, because with key fobs now, they would leave them in their cars, and so they get into a car, they didn't break in, they just got into an unlocked car. The key fob was in it, they started up and drive it away. And these kids weren't smart enough to steal a brand new Mercedes by hot wiring it, because you can't. But they're driving away in $150,000 cars because the car was left unlocked. So, those are simple things we could do in our parking areas. But remember your traffic flow patterns too, your pedestrian crosswalk areas. Make sure there's good, safe access to walk from vehicles to the building and back. Remember this: the traffic standards you put in your parking lots are not enforceable by law enforcement. Okay, so because you put up a speed limit sign that says 5 miles per hour, doesn't mean a traffic officer can write a speeding ticket for breaking that 5 mile hour sign. The only laws that can be enforced in a private parking lot are fire zone violations or fire parking, and disabled parking violations. All those other things are really kind of up to you, and it's a civil problem. So the reason why I say that is because if you do have a car crash in your parking lot, and it's because someone's going maybe the wrong way on an arrowed lane, ultimately there's a little bit of responsibility on us to make sure our parking lots were well managed to reduce the chances of those car crashes. That's property damage that occurred to somebody visiting us. So take a look at your traffic pedestrian examples. The traffic bollards that protect vehicles or keep vehicles from running into buildings or pedestrian areas, making sure those things are stable and up to speed. Just like I said, a reminder, all those things are important. Just because you're getting in the parking lot doesn't mean it's not your concern.
Yeah. Sounds great, or not great, but go forward.
Well, it gets harder as we go, Ryan. So when we get into the community examples, this is probably, I would probably say this is one of the hardest things we can do, because you're going to identify maybe some risks that you have absolutely no control over. And if we take a look at some of those lists, or the storage or production of toxic, explosive, and/or reactive materials. Boy, I just want to move my whole community. This is nearby me, but you can't, and you can't tell that Acme dynamite manufacturing company down the street to stop making dynamite. But we can be aware of it, though. Okay. And if it's in whatever our distance we decide is that we need to look at, then we can at least make sure we have plans. We plan under blue skies so that we don't have to make decisions under gray skies. We can have plans in place should we need to make decisions. Okay. The example I give is this. Is that I was doing a vulnerability assessment for a location. Primarily, they wanted active shooter training, okay, or active assailant, as we call it nowadays. And so I went there with the mindset of I look at an all hazards approach, though, okay, I'm not just going to plan for one thing. That active assailant problem was what they thought was their problem. They were within the final approach of a regional or a very small community airport. The airport didn't have a tower. It was literally just an unmanned tower where you fly into, usually smaller twin engine type of aircraft. I did a search of the FAA's website, and in the last 10 years, I think there was 4 or 5 airplanes that had dropped from the sky into the neighborhood surrounding this airport. Usually, unfortunately, the pilot was the fatality, but some houses burned and some traffic messed up and so forth. There was one fuel spill on property. Okay. But the reason why I tell you that is because I went back to the location. I said, yeah, we're going to write a plan for active assailant. Okay. But you understand, you have such a bigger risk when we use a risk index to show them that of a plane incident, because you're within 300 yards of this runway, and so what you thought was your biggest problem, the VA might reveal as a different problem. And looking at your community, transportation routes or lack thereof, registered sexual predators in your correctional and post-correctional institutions, as we call them, halfway houses. I don't think that we would call them those anymore. And so who can help you locate some of these things? Sometimes just an internet search, through your local state police, have usually the sexual predators, sexual offenders listed by address and by when the release date is and so forth. Flood areas, obviously the FEMA flood maps are all accessible for everybody. You probably already know these things, hopefully. But those flood areas do change. They do update those periodically. And so making sure you know what your A, B, C, D flood zones are for your location. But you can also reach out to your local community, your city, county, state engineers, planners, the state police, the fire inspector in your area, and ask them for some of the assistance also in helping to not only look for some of these things, but then plan for some of these things to make sure that you have at least done your due diligence, so that, and the terrible example I give is this, is the fire department knocks on your door one day and says, you have 20 minutes to evacuate or shelter in place. What are you going to do? And if you haven't planned this thing out, if you don't have vehicles to move all your residents, or have an idea of where you're going to take them to, and your plan says how you're going to do that, then you've really limited your choices. And this is not the time to try to write a plan now. So that's the kind of things that we're going to look for in our community. And Ryan, if you don't want to add anything to that, we're going to stay on that bus topic, because I'm going to mention buses and community hazards. Is that maybe you don't have all the vehicles to transport everybody in your property, or in your community, but the county or the state might. They might have the ability to memorandum of understanding between you and them to use the school buses or the local transportation buses to help you move your residents when one of those events might happen. So just as a thought or a little trigger to put in the back of your mind. But you probably do have at least a bus or two, and you've done one of these off-property special events, which is what, Ryan, that you mentioned, going to the casino.
Yep. That's a normal one. That's normally a trip that's a little more than a standard drive to your grocery store.
Okay.
So when you take residents and other people out of, their home for 8 to 10 hours a day, when they're not used to that, eating different foods, sometimes getting, drinking something maybe they wouldn't normally have, or that riding high of the adrenaline of winning or losing could throw some people off. And there have been accidents and incidents that occur. And when you're 2 to 3 hours away from your community, how are you able to jump in and change those things and really make an impact on if someone did fall, or if someone did have a skin tear, or some kind of other medication episode that occurs? How do you prioritize that single resident versus everyone else who may be on that trip with you too?
Right.
And having a plan in place. So some things like that are, make sure you never go with just one person. It's not just one bus driver and 10 residents, that you have maybe someone with some medical expertise, or someone who is able to trail with a different car to stay behind and go through those. I've been with this myself, taking someone to a basketball game, a group of residents, one falls, one has to stay overnight at the hospital. And we have to take, 10 other residents back 2 hours south. And how do you deal with those things? You don't want to leave them stranded all by themselves in a strange city. So you got to accommodate and take care of your residents.
And so the first time you're thinking about this should not be when it's happening. You're standing on the side of the road with a broke down bus, not sure who your roadside assistance service is for your community van, not sure how many people you actually brought with you. Everyone just got on the bus and you took off. So some of these things I put on here: roster of guests, kind of like, again, with the vessel type thing, the ship type thing, is how many souls on board, if you will. And I would even take some extra credit and say, how about a record of emergency data, at least maybe a minimum that you can take with, if this person's going with you, do they have a medication list? Do they have serious allergies they have to have? Do they have certain things that they need to have with them whenever they leave, even oxygen or what have you? You're the expert in this field. I'm just saying these are things that you need to think about when you move your residents around. A communication plan besides just a private cell phone. If your bus driver or your assistant is taking this group, and you're dependent on their cell phone to talk to you in an emergency, it's not their responsibility to make sure their cell phone works, and so it's your responsibility to make sure your community has provided them a good communication plan. And then maybe even check-in times, check-out times. And so if we know if somebody gets off schedule, then, and they didn't call in at a certain time, then we know, okay, hey, we need to start calling this group to see if we can get a hold of them or find out where they're at. Maybe they had a breakdown. Maybe they had a communication failure. They can't get in touch with anybody right now. And so have those hard stop check-in times that they're supposed to be checking in to make sure that, hey, everybody's here. We've still got 10 people. We're winning at the blackjack table. We're going to stay later, or whatever it might be. But, traveling with, like Ryan said, someone with some medical background, a true first aid kit, not the Band-Aid and tape kit that comes in your bus, maybe even an AED. We are pretty common with them in law enforcement for mass casualty kits, or for, stop the bleed kits. So they have the tourniquets and the quick clots in them. It might seem like overkill, But really, if you spent that money on it and it sat in a bag for 2 years until it expired, was it really a waste of money because it gave you that peace of mind to have it? Um, so all those things and then some, when you're moving by vehicle or you're going someplace different, like Ryan mentioned, outside of their normal life routines. Okay, people wander away, people get lost, people get hurt, and we certainly don't want that to happen on our watch. And so our crisis plan is going to spell out, when we get into that here shortly, next is going to spell out exactly how we handle those trips. The last part of our VA or vulnerability assessment, at least for what we're going to talk about today, and like I said, we can add more in if you want to, but this is the minimum, is you want to look at that current crisis plan. Now, our polling in the front end, Ryan, said that most people are aware, most people are pretty familiar with. I don't think anybody said, I've never heard of such a thing, right? So, but my question for you now then, when we do our vulnerability assessment or actually assess our current crisis plan is it up to date? Like Ryan said, is it procedure versus policy, or vice versa? When was the last time it was updated? Do we even know when was the last time it was updated? I'd like to see on a crisis plan not only when revisions were made, but maybe even who made them. They're signed off by the group or the team, and that if there's copies of these things that you've published with the local law enforcement, with local medical, with local fire rescue, you publish your copy with them so they know what to expect if they come here, and hopefully you're doing maybe something along that rhythm. That they have the most recent copy as well. So that revised date at the bottom of your plan or at the top of your plan or somewhere in the footer that says, hey, which plan are we working off of? This says ABC, yours says CDE, who the reviewing authority is, who has the ability to go through and do this. And this is, I'll add a little free topic in here. This is not the CEO, superintendent, headmaster, financial office, or maintenance person's job. That's too much for one person to do. Okay. This is something I would consider putting a committee on and having a head of that committee and having them in charge of maybe an annual VA or like I said, making sure a VA is done if you're bringing in someone from the outside, and then updating their plan to make sure it accommodates what you discovered in the VA and what you prioritized out in your risk index. And so who that reviewing authority is, the list of people to contact. This is, these are some of the things that I found looking at these plans before, is that they have a chain of command, if you will, of people to notify during an emergency. And when I run down through that list, phone numbers are out of date. That person doesn't work here anymore. That person retired 2 years ago. It's like, well, when was the last time this plan was updated? I mentioned maps here. Please don't use your standard, I think I could say Google Maps without copyright violation. But if you're using Google Maps for anything besides just looking at Google Maps, okay, Google can come after you if they choose to, I suppose, for copyright violation. I know they've gone after the real estate listing services now. Okay, they're not supposed to be using, MLS is not supposed to be using Google Maps. So with that, understand that Google map may be several years old. That image of your community might be two images stitched together, depending on how the size of your facility. That one picture might have been taken 2 years ago, another picture might have taken a year ago, and those two pictures are stitched together, so you're not getting an accurate representation of your map. And you do want to have a map of your community, at least if nothing else, for your emergency operations plan. So consider having somebody fly your property with a drone and do some aerial photo. It is very minor labor to have something like this done. And you get an accurate, literal, up-to-date, moment-to-moment picture of what it looks like now with your traffic. And you can have this, you can use this when you're doing your traffic assessment as well. But don't forget to look at your current crisis plan during the VA to make sure it's up to speed as well. So I mentioned those 6 items that we're talking about to look at in your VA, and certainly you can add more if you choose to. Some of the things we didn't talk about is your current communication plans. I mentioned it during travel. Is that what is your communication plans? Do you have communication interoperability throughout your entire community? Do you have portable radios? Do you depend on your cell phones? Do you use a phone list to talk to everybody, or emergency text messaging type of a service to be able to notify everybody if they need to come in, or if the day is canceled or the A shift is going to hold over because of severe weather, whatever that is. Look at your communication plan in your VA. Okay. And be very specific about, well, don't be specific, be very honest with yourself about when you do your look at these topics. Is you say, well, I'm sure that'll be fine. Well, why are you sure? And let's be honest with ourselves. This is a good, hard, honest look, and that's why I like to have someone from the outside come in to look at it, because maybe they're not going to be as so forgiving with you when they find these holes in the fences.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bill, you said two things earlier that I think really struck. One is use other people from other buildings to assess your own with
Right.
that fresh set of eyes. Also, when you build those security committees or the safety committees, make sure there's someone from each department there. Have dining audit nursing, have nursing audit dining, because nursing is going to go through with a different lens looking for those trip and slip hazards and those things, and dining is going to look for improper storage of whether it's food supplies or chemical supplies, just different things for different expertise for different departments. So bringing everybody together really helps get that full view.
Such an important point, and ultimately, once we get to a point where we're actually vetting our plan, and next month we're going to talk about drills and how you test this thing to make sure it works. But that's where I'm going to take your suggestion even further. We can go into their local community, to go into our fire service, our law enforcement service, our city or county, commissions, and say, hey, can you send me, so and so, or the civil engineer, the water treatment, the whoever, and let them be a part, or at least an ad hoc member on my committee, because they're going to bring a set of eyes or an expertise that you're going to have no insight to, and they're going to really be a valuable tool. And by the way, they're free. And so to have law enforcement, fire, civil engineers come and help you with your planning process, or at least maybe look over your planning process. That's your subject matter expert right there for some of these things anyways.
So we wanted to provide everyone with a tool, a really first level basic vulnerability assessment, essentially, that we've put together with Bill at AccuShield here. And we think this is a great start to start getting us in that mindset of safety, security, process, and planning, and just get our heads around it. And let's start putting pen to paper here. So feel free to download this. This is the first step. And if you'd like to discuss this with us at AccuShield, we are more than happy to take the time and help review this with you and really show maybe some options on what we could do to help pump up a score, or maybe work with our peers and pull from different areas and really all work together and collaborate, because in the end we all want the best for all of our residents, not just within our own community, but within senior living and skilled nursing as a whole.
So this is kind of like the pre-test, if you will. So we're getting ready for the exam. This isn't the exam, but this is at least going to give you kind of a peek into it of what your level of preparedness is right now, probably. Maybe your level of awareness and aptitude for it. And we hope with last month and this month and next month, I'm really excited about next month, Ryan. I don't know if I'm revealing it or not. I'm teasing a little bit. That we also are raising that level of awareness, preparedness for you, and as much excitement as we have for being safe and taking care of our residents, taking care of our staff. Let's not forget our vendors and visitors, because they're all your responsibility when they're on your property.
Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're going to touch on here. This slide is overwhelming, but so is the amount of people that come into our building on a given month. So we're looking at just 150 unit average senior living community, has about 238 unique visitors every single month. That's over 1,000 unique visitors every year into our building. And are we tracking those people? The family, friends, clergy, volunteers, home health, physician, hospice. I could keep listing on there, and I'm sure all of you have plenty more to add. So that's really important to us, is when we do need a reaction that occurs from a crisis, not everyone needs to have the same plan. Not our HVAC tech who may be there doesn't need to be walked out in a wheelchair, just like some residents in memory care assisted would be.
Right.
So having a plan that works for everyone, not just residents, not just staff, not just families, is very important. And knowing who's in that building is just as important, so we can go through and make sure we account for each and every single person. And that's where AccuShield comes in as well. We're able to track everyone who comes in, everyone who comes out, residents, staff, vendors, see who's there, and then also run and produce an evacuation report for you off your phone, off our printer in case of an emergency. So if needed, something happens, we're doing room checks. We know exactly who's there, who's not. So we're not searching for someone who may have gone out with their daughter to lunch and where it's the middle of a fire, we can't find somebody. Fire department's looking for room 212, and turns out the whole time they weren't there. So kind of knowing that information and having quick access to it makes us a little bit quicker on that response time. And as Bill knows here, seconds and minutes turn into lives in certain cases.
Absolutely. And I can tell you when I first started doing this, I mean, this has been since 2000. Some of the initial thoughts we had when we were doing schools is how quickly can we account for everyone on campus, who's accounted for? And it's so vitally important not to know who's accounted for because when the first responders show up, we need to know who's not accounted for because that's who we're going to spend our time and energy on now is trying to find or figure out, where they're at. Do they need me? And so we put so much effort into getting the students off the campus or to at least a safer area, and then we did these big ladder charts of the accountability for classrooms. We broke them down into little fire teams and individual squads, almost using a military model to do it because it was the fastest way we come up with. And really, we were aiming for somewhere like in the range of a couple hours to initially to get these things done to say who made it out and who's not present that we needed to look for. And AccuShield can do that in seconds for me now, which is like it's almost like cheating.
And we just have a little testimonial here from someone who uses this, and it's just talking all about how our evacuation management can help us identify more efficiently, accurately, quickly. And that's all we care about really is getting you the information as quickly as we can so you guys can work through not just that policy, but the process and procedure as well to make sure we take care of everyone who's in our building coming in and out and are protected and can work with those first responders or maybe just internally to make sure that everybody's safe and accounted for. And we at AccuShield say it, we are security that you can see. So now I think that brings us probably to the end here, Bill. And I know you teased a little bit about what's coming on next. If you want to go into a little further, we can
Right.
go there and kind of let everybody go under the
Kind
hour.
of summarize up to where we're at. So we talked about raising your awareness, becoming aware, making sure you know what you're up against, doing a vulnerability assessment now, testing your plan or taking a look at your entire community, see where the problems are and how to fix those things. Okay. Um, and that's going to include updating your crisis plan or emergency operation plan. And then finally, next month, how do you test that? How do you make sure it works? Because in an air conditioned room on the top of a table, it might sound really great. Okay. But the idea of actually testing your plan to see if it works under dark skies or gray skies. And how do you do a drill for emergency operations plan in a memory care unit? That's a tough challenge. So we're going to talk about conducting drills and after action reports for, the things maybe you maybe not even doing after action reports for that I'm going to say you probably should be and documenting those to learn from. So we're going to touch on those at least to get you into the freshman sophomore level of planning next month. And I really can't wait to start talking about these because this is probably where the real nuts and bolts operation starts happening here.
And I did see a question. I answered it back in the audience for us here, but a question about does AccuShield have the ability to flag an unwanted visitor? Yes, AccuShield can flag unwanted
Question.
visitors at sign in. We can also, when they do sign in, don't say like alert, alert, alert. It'll just give a quick error, like maybe you can hold there. We can custom build some of those things, but we will send a notification to administrators, directors, anyone like that who could respond. There's been many times that I've had to do this when there's a family member who is not quite allowed to visit mom or grandma there at the behest of the POA. And you have to be able to have that conversation to be able to respond to it. Any
Yeah, I
other
think we
questions?
mentioned a little bit of that last week too, or last month when we talked about, even getting the course of civil injunctions, and those court orders that are in place to make sure that those people are not doing what they shouldn't be doing and that we're not letting them into the community, onto the property to do those things. And then teaching your staff that script of how to approach, how to address that when you come up on it. And that's part of our training. That goes into our training model. We should be telling them what to do during this. This maybe isn't a crisis yet if there's someone's trying to get onto their property, but it could become a crisis if they get on your property. So I think it falls into this world.
Yeah. Nope. All works together in a complicated ecosystem here. But if we don't have any more questions or anything else coming through, I think we will be able to wrap this, call it a day, get everybody back to your busy lives in under an hour here. And we thank everyone for joining us.